Hello, good evening. We begin tonight with the indescribable loss conveyed today in a silent courtroom as the parents of babies murdered and attacked by serial killer Lucy Letby spoke in Manchester. "My arms, my heart, my life all felt so painfully empty," one mother read. Another, whose 7-day-old son was killed, said she had encountered evil disguised as a caring nurse. The personal victim impact statements were delivered often through tears and with trembling hands. In the dock where Lucy Letby should have sat were 2 prison officers. She refused to appear to hear the judge hand down a whole life sentence. Caterina Vitozzi watched the proceedings and sent this report.
The judge called her a cruel, calculated killer, and today she delivered a final insult. Nurse Lucy Letby, refusing to be in court for her sentencing, didn't see the faces of her victims' parents or see their tears as they read out statements they'd written, thinking she would be there to hear them.
You tried to take everything away from us. You thought it was your right to play God with our children's lives. You thought you could enter our lives and turn it upside down, but you will never win. We hope you live a very long life and spend every single day suffering for what you have done.
I felt like I'd been stabbed in the heart. No words could describe how I was feeling. I kept wishing it had happened to me, and at that time would have gladly taken his place.
Letby had killed 2 of this father's triplet sons. He told the court today that after their loss, he had tried to take his own life.
I live in constant fear of something happening to any of my children. Lucy Letby has destroyed our lives. The anger and the hatred I have towards her will never go away. It has destroyed me as a man and as a father.
Some families had given evidence during the trial, but this was the first time they could talk about the impact of Lucy Letby on their lives, not just in that moment of attack in the hospital, but for every single day since.
Lucy bathed him, an action I deeply regret, and dressed him in a woolen gown. He was buried in that gown, a gift from the unit chosen by Lucy. I feel sickened by the choice we made.
His hand and footprint were made into a pendant. I wore it round my neck. It made me feel closer to him. On the 3rd of July 2018, when Lucy Letby was first arrested, these few tangible memories I had of my son felt tainted. She took those hand and footprints. I felt so conflicted as to what that meant, so I stopped wearing them. There is no sentence that will ever compare to the excruciating agony we have suffered as a consequence of your murder of our son. But at least now there is no debate that, in your own words, you killed them on purpose. You are evil. You did this.
These were the words that Letby herself wrote in a note found by police in her house, words the mother of child C had wanted her to hear. After court today, one family said that it was a scandal that Lucy Letby hadn't been inside to face them. They say it made a mockery of the British justice system, and in their words, they believe she should have been dragged into the courtroom to hear the victims' families. Lucy Letby also didn't hear the judge sentence her to a whole life order.
There was a deep malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions. During the course of this trial, you have coldly denied any responsibility for your wrongdoing and sought to attribute some fault to others. You have no remorse.
Lucy Letby will never be released from prison. A serial baby killer, jailed for life for taking so many. Caterina Vitozzi, Sky News, Manchester.
So the families were robbed of the chance to confront Lucy Letby in court. And although it's clear she will die in jail, there are still questions over why she was allowed to continue working on the neonatal ward even after doctors raised concerns. Today, Sky News learnt one senior nursing manager had been suspended from her post, as our crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports.
The families of Lucy Letby's victims may now have justice. What they don't have are the answers to all their questions. They might never know her motivation, but will they learn why hospital executives ignored repeated warnings about her from consultants on her ward? According to a solicitor for some of the families, the scandal is far from over.
Because there's still questions to be asked of the trust. There's still investigations that need to take place as to who knew what managers should have acted and didn't. So it's not the end of the process for them, it's just some degree of closure. We're instructed as a firm to look at a civil case, and that would be a case against the NHS Trust, against the Countess of Chester.
The inquiry into what happened will be independent from the NHS and government, but will be non-statutory, meaning witnesses can't be forced to give evidence. The families say that isn't good enough. The Chester Hospital's former Director of Nursing, Alison Kelly, here greeting Queen Camilla, then Duchess of Cornwall, has just been suspended from her job with another trust in the northwest. On the left is the hospital's former chief executive, Tony Chambers. They were among several senior managers accused during the trial of dismissing early concerns about Letby.
Doctors are held to account via the General Medical Council, so we are regulated and we have a duty of care to patients. That means we should speak up and speak out and put patient safety at the forefront of everything we do. And we think that that kind of regulation should apply to non-clinical managers as well.
Critics accused executives of putting the hospital's reputation ahead of child safety. If Letby had been investigated earlier, some babies might not have died. The victims' families could not have hoped for a tougher sentence. Lucy Letby has become one of only 3 serving women prisoners who've been told they'll never be released. She joins House of Horrors killer Rosemary West, who tortured and murdered 10 young women and girls in Gloucester, and Joanna Dennehy, who stabbed 3 men to death in Peterborough. Grim company for a young woman who many once saw as a poster girl for the NHS. Martin Brunt, Sky News, Manchester.
And Martin is outside Manchester Crown Court this evening. So, Martin, after 10 months, this harrowing case is over. But is it likely to be the end of proceedings?
Very unlikely, I'd say, for a start. The prosecution has to decide whether it wants a retrial on those charges, 6 attempted murder charges, that the jury couldn't decide on. So that's one thing. The defence, of course, Lucy Letby continuing to deny those crimes. The defence could go for an appeal. It would have to get permission to do that. And there are growing reports that detectives are looking at as many as 30 other incidents where babies at hospitals where Lucy Letby had once worked came to some harm. And of course, I mean, all of that is speculation, but of course there is the independent inquiry ordered by the Health Secretary. Now, the government wants that to be quick so its recommendations can be implemented, but we understand that the Prime Minister is considering listening to the calls of many people, the families, MPs, clinicians, that it should be a statutory inquiry so that witnesses can be compelled to give evidence. You also heard in my report that a lawyer for some of the families is considering suing the hospital trust for damages. And of course, there's a call from one leading prosecution witness, a consultant, whose evidence was crucial, it's thought, in the convictions. He's raised the possibility of the police being asked to consider corporate manslaughter charges against some of those senior managers who many feel were too slow to react to the first raising of the alarm about Lucy Letby's behaviour in the ward around those babies.
Live there in Manchester for us, thank you. Mason Greenwood's career at Manchester United is over tonight after the club confirmed he would not return to the pitch. Prosecutors dropped charges of attempted rape and coercion earlier this year. He's now been dropped from the squad after an internal investigation. The striker has always denied the charges but admitted he'd made mistakes. Here's our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam.
There's never been any question that Mason Greenwood is a footballer of exceptional ability. It's his life off the pitch that's ended his career at Manchester United. Online allegations led to charges of attempted rape, controlling and coercive behaviour and assault. When they were dropped, the club began its own investigation. Pictures this month of him training in the park led to the suspicion he'd soon be welcomed back to rejoin the big names at Old Trafford, until this announcement from the club. Based on the evidence available to us, we've concluded that the material posted online did not provide a full picture and that Mason did not commit the offences in respect of which he was originally charged. That said, as Mason publicly acknowledges today, he has made mistakes which he's taking responsibility for. Within football, the decision was welcomed, if not the handling of the affair.
They have got there. However, I would say that the process in getting there, I think, has been pretty horrible. When you have significant situations and difficult situations like this, it requires strong and authoritative leadership.
The player himself said, "I was brought up to know that violence or abuse in any relationship is wrong. I did not do the things I was accused of, and in February I was cleared of all charges. However, I fully accept I made mistakes." Today's decision has been part of a collaborative process between Manchester United, my family and me. The best decision for us all is for me to continue my football career away from Old Trafford, where my presence will not be a distraction for the club. Some fan groups had called for this outcome.
It's just one of those situations where there are very few positives, even though the decision that has happened today has been the right one. It seems to have been made for the wrong reasons.
And few United fans disagreed.
Right decision, to be fair. I think when you take into account the rise of the women's game, things like that, you don't want to have any sort of negative impact on that.
They would have lost a lot of supporters. I really do.
In an open letter to fans, the club's chief executive, Richard Arnold, the man who made the decision, said this wasn't the end of the matter for United. They would continue to support the alleged victim and Mason Greenwood. The question is, where does a player with so much swirling around him even begin to rebuild a career? Is it even possible to remain in football? He is certain to remain a figure of controversy, a player who had the world at his feet, but who's learned that some things are way bigger than football. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
6 months' worth of rain fell in parts of Southern California in one day after the first tropical storm in the state for 84 years. The powerful weather system is now moving through western states, with 16 million people now under flood watch. Sky's US correspondent James Matthews reports now from Cathedral City.
It took a while for scenes like these to descend on California. They'll take a while to disappear. The state's first tropical storm in nearly a century did this to Cathedral City, 100 miles east of Los Angeles. In a place where they don't do flooding, they do now. The worry had been that rain would run off hard desert terrain. It brought the flood and mud to this town. Cars that were left in haste lay stuck and abandoned. On roads and pavements, digger crews scraped the layer left by the storm. It was a bad day for business. The population of Cathedral City was otherwise occupied. The morning after the storm before gave an idea of how bad Hillary had been. This was one of the main routes in and out of Palm Springs, and water flowed off the coastal mountains. People who weren't caught up in disruption were watching it. This was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and traffic jams were a spectator sport.
It's devastating. I mean, in all my life, I never have seen anything like this at all.
This is crazy. We got train derailments and everything out here right now.
It's not like California.
No, definitely not like California, especially the California desert. We don't get weather like this.
As bad as Storm Hillary was, it could have been worse. There had been predictions of catastrophic, life-threatening floods.
Some will say that we dodged the bullet. I will say we dodged a weather bomb.
Amidst all this, there is some good news. For the first time in 3 years, parts of California are drought-free in the wake of Storm Hilary. It is a measure of good news, albeit amidst an increase in extreme weather events with extreme severity. James Matthews, Sky News, in Cathedral City, California.
Well, from these storms in California to wildfires in Hawaii, 850 people are still missing on the island of Maui, and at least 114 people have now been confirmed to have died. President Joe Biden is expected to arrive in Lahaina, the main town affected, tonight to meet families and local officials. He's pausing his holiday in Lake Tahoe after criticism from Republicans about his initial response. Border guards in Saudi Arabia were accused today of killing hundreds of migrants, many of them Ethiopian, as they attempted to enter the oil-rich country from neighbouring Yemen. The charity Human Rights Watch said it spoke to dozens of people, some who described bodies left scattered on the ground. Sky News understands an investigation is ongoing. A warning that our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle's report includes details of a forced rape.
This line of people snaking up the mountain path along the Yemeni border are asylum seekers from Ethiopia, heading to Saudi Arabia to try and find safety from conflict. But hundreds of those migrants have allegedly been killed by Saudi border guards trying to prevent them from entering the country. The charity Human Rights Watch has documented evidence of killings and spoken to survivors. These interviews were carried out by them and voiced by actors.
In my group, there were 7 people, 5 men and 2 girls. The border guards made us remove our clothes and they told us to rape the girls. The girls were 15 years old. One of the men refused. The border guards killed him on the spot. I participated in the rape. Yes. To survive, I did it.
The region is hard to access, but Human Rights Watch located a number of Saudi border posts and geolocated video footage of dead Ethiopians, some hidden under bushes, others buried in rough graves. The dangerous migration route, often referred to as the Eastern Route, spans from the Horn of Africa, across the Gulf of Aden, through Yemen and into Saudi Arabia. Smugglers operating in Yemen take people to 2 informal camps before attempting to cross the border. Both camps act as holding areas with thousands of people waiting to cross the border. They report being shot at close range and then mortared as they try to escape back into Yemen.
The Saudi border guards are using explosive weapons and shooting Ethiopian migrants at close range. The reason why it's so important to note that these are widespread and systematic attacks is because we are saying they may amount to a crime against humanity.
Last week, Downing Street announced the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will visit London to meet with Rishi Sunak in the coming months. And these accusations of mass killings on the border show a brutal side to the Saudi state that critics say the government is trying to hide. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
Scotland has been at the epicentre of Europe's drug deaths crisis for more than a decade. But Sky News understands annual figures released tomorrow will show a drop in the number of people fatally overdosing. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis travelled to Glasgow, Dundee and Aberdeenshire to see firsthand the change in tactics now delivering some success.
This is said to be Dundee's most dangerous postcode, where crime is rife and drugs are deadly.
I've got my kids on the weekend, and I don't even bring my kids over on the weekend. There was people ODing all over the place in that, you know, there was ambulances. I found somebody on the steps one time.
Dundee is the epicentre of Europe's drugs death crisis, the capital of the continent's overdose emergency. Those living in our poorest neighbourhoods are 15 times more likely to die from drugs. And for years, this has been the place with the highest rate of people losing their lives across Scotland. Jesse is 53, a former heroin addict, now desperate for alternatives.
It's mostly crack. You know, that's like just the last couple of years, whitewashed Dundee.
There has been a steep and sustained rise in the loss of life across Scotland since 2013, with a very minor dip last year when 1,330 people died.
One of the drivers for drug-related deaths is the lack of people actually being in the treatment that would potentially save their life. So we know that treatment is a protective factor against drug-related deaths, yet we have less than 40% of people accessing that treatment.
Willie is 48 and was hooked on heroin for a decade, with catastrophic consequences.
Gangrene set down that quick. She had to take my leg off above the knee.
How much heroin were you taking in order for that to happen to your leg? Just give me a sense as to...
A half gram. 15-pound bag.
Inside this women's homeless shelter in Glasgow, drugs used to be banned. But a change in direction now sees residents being provided with needles and naloxone, which is a medication to reverse opioid overdose.
They saved my life. You can actually go to your worker and say, I'm going to go and buy a bit of cocaine or heroin. They will come up and check on you.
The Simon community who run these units says this new tactic has resulted in a drop from 17 deaths to 1 in a year. So are these solutions working, and will they play into this year's deaths data?
The figures will be down, and not just a little bit. I think they'll be reasonably down. There is hugely increased levels of naloxone being distributed.
Tucked away here in rural Aberdeenshire, a strict abstinence residential rehab facility backed by government cash.
This is their home for the next 12 months.
Phones are banned. Residents are weaned off all drugs, including tobacco, within 3 weeks.
The individuals who come here onto the programme going on to live clean, free, sober lives, 45%.
The war on drugs rages on. It seems too early to conclude the tide has finally turned. Conor Gillis, Sky News.
The Metropolitan Police say they will take no further action over the cash for honours allegations involving the King's charity, the Prince's Foundation. The King was officially welcomed to Balmoral today as he takes up summer residence at the castle. His former aide, who was chief executive of the charity, resigned after claims he helped a Saudi billionaire obtain British citizenship and a knighthood. The National Triathlon governing body in Ireland has confirmed that the swimming section of an Ironman race in which 2 participants died was not sanctioned by its officials. Ivan Chittenden and Brendan Wall were participating in the swim when they got into difficulties in separate incidents. Well, Triathlon Ireland said an investigation is ongoing. Spain's women's football team have arrived in Madrid this evening after their World Cup victory, but the head of the Spanish Football Association has admitted the win has been tarnished by an unwanted kiss. Luis Rubiales has now apologised after footage emerged of him embracing and kissing Jennifer Hermoso on the lips during post-match celebrations. Spain's Equality Minister described it as an act of sexual violence. So they made history, they were watched by millions and have inspired many who want to follow in their footsteps. Tonight, the Lionesses are flying home from Australia, but without the coveted World Cup trophy. But will this renewed interest in the women's game translate into commercial success? Rachel Venables has been finding out.
Chloe Kelly, Lauren James. My favourite is Mary Ups. Mary Ups.
We might have lost the World Cup final, but for these girls, the Lionesses had already achieved something far more valuable.
My favourite lioness is Chloe Kelly because I think she's an inspiration to me and a lot of girls.
I like Mary Ups because sometimes people give her a lot of hate, but she doesn't listen to it, so she inspires me a lot even though I'm a striker.
For years, just accessing the game was one of the biggest barriers to women and girls playing football. England forward Beth Mead has seen huge transformation in just a few years.
I had to join a boys team though when I was younger because there wasn't many girls to play with at the time, so it's pretty cool to see you guys today with all the girls to play with.
After the success at the Euros last summer, this club saw a 50% boost in the number of girls wanting to play football, and they hope to see similar numbers now after the World Cup. It's clear the women's game is growing and growing, but at the same time, many say it's still got a long way to go.
We lose too many girls at 16 when they go out of the game. I would love to see in 4 years' time that even if we can just get half of the head coaches that are playing at the World Cup being female coaches. That would be amazing. That we know that we've made great strides to it.
There's no doubt that this tournament made icons out of these players. Millie Bright was in the top 10 most searched terms on Saturday, and the Lionesses coach, Serena Wiegman, was the 6th most searched on Google in the UK on Sunday. But online trends don't always translate to match views. The Women's World Cup final against Spain was watched by 13.3 million people, but 31 million watched the men's Euros final against Italy in 2021. There's also been a huge backlash against Nike, who refused to sell Earp's kit, leaving some to make rather homemade versions of their own.
Nike have stupidly done something which they shouldn't have done. They haven't created this shirt. It's probably the most important shirt actually on the pitch for some people, and also everybody wants to emulate Mary now.
Nike says they're committed to women's football and are working towards solutions for future tournaments. Women's football might be a long way off having parity with the men's game, but the legacy of this tournament for the Lionesses and the little girls who play the beautiful game will be monumental. Rachel Venables, Sky News, Wembley.
Yes, more coverage of their landing. Right now, though, let's get coverage of Joe Biden arriving on Maui, on the Hawaiian Islands. Here he is at Kahului with the First Lady Jill Biden. The first stop for them will be an aerial tour of the fire-impacted areas en route to Lahaina, where they'll land and meet residents affected, so badly affected, obviously, emergency teams and local officials. This comes as we hear the news of 850 still missing, 114 confirmed to have died. We're told by the County Mayor, Richard Bisson, that 1,200 people on the list have now been found safe. But only 27 of the deceased have so far been identified, 11 families notified. And the suggestion now, the terrible suggestion, is that identifying victims could take months or even years. Such was the devastation. But to hugs, as you can see there, at that airport, such a very difficult time. The prospect of rebuilding, incredibly difficult. We understand the President plans to name a federal emergency official to lead long-term recovery efforts on the island at some point during this visit. Some backlash, not least by Republicans against him for coming so late, but backlash to local officials who did not set off that alarm system, no activated alarm system, no siren, which has partly led to such devastation. Those people cowering in the waters off the island to try and make their escape, and others who simply failed to flee. It will be no doubt an emotional visit for the US President. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of The Guardian, the headline, Letby locked up for life over sadistic murder of 7 babies, their headline there. Well, tonight I'll be joined by the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the Whitehall editor of the Financial Times, Lucy Fisher. Back in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. Serial killer nurse Lucy Letby has been told she will die in jail. Today, she refused to face the parents of the children she murdered in court. Manchester United have announced the England forward Mason Greenwood will no longer play for the club. He was cleared of allegations of attempted rape, assault and coercive behaviour in February, but it has admitted to making mistakes. And one person has died and another is missing after Storm Hilary brought flooding and record rainfall to Mexico and California. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Clurer, and the Whitehall editor of the Financial Times, Lucy Fisher. Pippa, I'm told Lucy is rebooting her computer. She'll be with us shortly, but let's crack on with the front pages first of all, starting with the Metro, which leads with the sentencing of Lucy Letby. Their headline, calculating, cunning, cruel, cowardly. That's after the killer nurse failed to appear in the courtroom dock today. It is also the lead for The Eye. They say coward Letby refuses to face baby's parents. The Daily Express continues the coverage with a similar headline, one final act of wickedness from a coward. Letby locked up for life over sadistic murder of 7 babies. That's on the front page of The Guardian. The Daily Mail leads with Letby on its front page too. Those lives were not yours to take. There is no forgiving, not now, not ever, reads the headline. And one final act of wickedness is how the Daily Mirror has summed up today's sentencing. Meanwhile, the Financial Times reports that bosses of the blue chip index have been given a 16% pay rise amid calls from the Bank of England to avoid unsustainable raises. And the Star says there's a big row brewing as coffee has overtaken tea as the nation's favourite drink. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages for yourself of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and listen to our guests. But first of all, let's go to Lucy, still awaiting Pippa. But this terrible case concluding today, and now Lucy Letby, joining the ranks of Myra Hindley and Rose West in the annals of the worst women offenders, Lucy.
Yes, exactly, Anna. The final addendum to this totally shocking case, the judge today announcing a whole life term as expected, 14 life sentences in total handed down to the 33-year-old neonatal nurse for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 more babies. The judge summing up her cruel, calculating and cynical campaign of child murder and how her malevolence bordered on sadism. Of course, she wasn't in the dock to hear the sentence in what many of the papers are pointing out was a final act of cowardice today, but also really important, the parents of so many of the victims also able to read out impact statements about how what has happened to their children has destroyed their lives, reminding us all that this sentence will not in any way dull the pain and the way that their lives have been forever affected by bereavement.
Yes, and those personal statements from the families, victim impact statements as they used to be called, utterly heartbreaking. The judge pointing out that some of your victims were only a day or a few days old or extremely vulnerable, picking off the most vulnerable members of society. And, the parents in The Guardian as well, we encountered evil in the guise of a caring nurse. The fact that this was someone in the caring profession made it so much more heartbreaking, and that trust has gone for all of these families, some of whom decided never to have children again or set foot anywhere near the hospital again.
Well, absolutely. And interesting, the judge, pointing out that Lucy Letby's actions went against the human instinct, the natural human instinct to provide care and nurture of babies, given that vulnerability. I think what's just unfathomable about what's happened is also captured by the judge in a sense. He made clear he wasn't able to summarise or shine a light on her underlying reason, making clear that that was known only to her. And I think many people, myself included, have looked at this case just unable to understand how anyone could behave in this way. And perhaps particularly a woman, you know, she is only the fourth woman ever to be handed a whole life sentence after Rose West, Myra Hindley, and Joanna Dennehy in 2014. And I think, in particular, Joanna Dennehy is a case worth bringing up, because part of the conversation around what's happened with Lucy Letby refusing to appear in the dock has been this question of, you know, when ministers should bring forward the legislation they've promised to force criminals who are sentenced to hear the sentences handed down to them in person, to allow victims, you know, to look them in the eye as they receive their sentence. Joanna Dennehy, when she was given the whole life sentence in 2014 for murdering 3 men and stabbing 2 others, she laughed in the dock and then proceeded to wail as the judge read out her sentence. And I think we must also kind of remember that actually the reactions of people receiving whole life terms could in their own way be very damaging for victims to witness if it is one of mirth or somehow hysteria.
Yes, it's interesting because a prison officer told us today that actually the powers are there. If a judge deems a prisoner needs to be brought up from the cells, they will be. But the sense was in this, dragging a female prisoner, you know, to the dock would not be a good look. So that was quite interesting that you say that the legislation is coming. What there has been pressure about is this independent inquiry is at the moment not statutory, which means that people cannot be forced to give evidence. Whether the Prime Minister is beginning to listen to calls for it to have greater teeth. Now, that would be interesting to see if, you know, hearing the horror of this case.
Certainly, and Downing Street today making clear they have not ruled out a statutory inquiry in this case, I think suggesting they are aware of the pressure that is growing on the government to turn it into a statutory inquiry. Of course, they make the case for the benefits of not going down that route would be that the probe could be carried out in a more timely way. And in a case as shocking as this, and as you say, Anna, you know, it has destroyed the trust of so many families affected, other people kind of looking on and who followed this extraordinary trial, that to get to the bottom of how this happened, how warnings were missed, and to ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again or go undetected for so long is also a pressing concern. But it does feel like there is a growing campaign for the government to make this a statutory inquiry because, of course, it would, as you say, give them the powers to compel witnesses to appear.
The Daily Mail, those lives were not yours to take. There is no forgiving, not now, not ever. You know, regaling some of the grieving parents in those personal statements, you are evil, you are nothing, as she received 14 whole life jail terms. The question is what happens now in terms of further litigation? You know, should the Crown Prosecution Service... Oh, Pippa's here now. Pippa, maybe I'll put this to you, in fact. We're just talking about the personal statements being made in court, the whole life tariff, the compulsion to bring somebody up to the dock for sentencing in cases like this. But I was just going to bring in, you know, what happens now in terms of other litigation. For example, a civil case against the Trust for compensation, whether the Crown Prosecution pursues those other cases in which the jury could not agree. You know, what happens now, really, in terms of this case?
Well, the families in the trial that's just concluded will qualify for compensation from the state, but it's really not very financial compensation, I should say. Obviously, there's no way of compensating for the tragic circumstances which they've had to go through, and it's about £13,000 or £14,000. But there are other, of course, as you say, ways that they can pursue this, and one of those is through litigation against the trust. I would be surprised if none of the families decided to do that. So I think it's highly likely that with some time, when they've had a chance to kind of process what's happened in the last 48 hours with the trial, and then have some time to sort of consider next steps, I think it's highly likely that families would consider doing that. Obviously in parallel, we've got the public inquiry that we're expecting, which I think I just joined you as Lucy was talking about it potentially being a statutory public inquiry rather than a non-statutory one. But if you are one of these families that have gone through this terrible, terrible tragedy, and you feel that while the individual has now been held to account through the courts, the trust absolutely has not, then you can imagine that they might want to pursue that with every means that they have available to them. And of course, one of those is, as we say, through the courts. So I think this is not over yet.
Yes, and the eye, once again, also going with the coward Letby refusing to face baby's parents, whether that, hinders their sense of closure at the end of this 10-month trial. So many days of the jurors out considering their multiple verdicts. And the question, I suppose, for some, whether there should be corporate manslaughter against those in charge, those who seemed to refuse to listen to whistleblowers, Lucy, who were trying to bring Lucy Letby's acts to the public's knowledge.
Yes, I mean, extraordinary details that have come out in the past 48 hours or so about not only warnings from consultants who played detective, trying to work out what this spate of mysterious deaths between June 2015 and June 2016 had in common, who worked out that the sole factor in common between all these cases was Lucy Letby. The fact that the chief executive of the hospital ended up apologising to Lucy Letby for the finger being pointed at her, said the doctors in question that had raised the concerns would be dealt with, and indeed tried to help her find place on a prestigious course as a sort of recompense for her having been sort of flagged up and complained about in this way. It really is just absolutely shocking to see these details. But equally today, we've also heard about another senior NHS director who ignored complaints and concerns about Lucy Letby finally being suspended. Again, as Pippa said, nothing that has happened in the aftermath can do anything to bring back those children who were murdered as far as the parents are concerned. But I think certainly they will want answers, and to see people who failed to intervene and failed to safeguard and provide the protections necessary for children in the care of this hospital certainly will face more questions and disciplinary action.
Yes, and indeed, I think 7 paediatricians who'd been raising concerns were forced to apologise to Lucy Letby seemingly against their will. There are so many questions which hopefully the public inquiry, in whatever guise it comes, Pippa, will start to answer. Daily Express as well, one final act of wickedness from a coward. The comments again of one of the mothers at Manchester Crown Court, hoping to stare, this woman who'd been convicted and then sentenced in the eye for taking their children. How will this go down, do you think, in history? We look back at Rose West and Myra Hindley, these famous names, the House of Horrors, the Moors murderers, terrible, terrible cases of crime in this country. And here Lucy Letby, is amongst them.
Yes, and I think it was really sort of a really devastating blow to those families that were in court and wanted to, as is their right, deliver victim statements. And it's just not the same, I think, handing over sheets of paper with those written down. They wanted to be able to see Letby in court when that sentence was passed down on her, to see her reaction when she was told that she would be spending the rest of her life in jail. And they were robbed of that final opportunity, which I think inevitably will go down very badly. I mean, when we asked the government about this today, and colleagues over previous days have suggested, is that the law does actually allow a judge to insist that somebody appears in court. That didn't happen for sentencing. That didn't happen in this case. But the maximum for the likelihood is that person could potentially be found in contempt of court. And of course, the maximum sentence in this particular instance would be 2 years. When you're already serving your life in prison, that's not much of a motivation for somebody to appear. So the government's looking again at what it can do to compel prisoners to appear for sentencing. Although, of course, the families and reporters and politicians and people that sort of kept an eye on this over recent months and years will know that this is not the first time that the government has promised to act on this to effectively drag prisoners to court and for sentencing, and it hasn't happened yet.
Pippa, Lucy, stay there. Plenty more still to come, including why the Cash for Honours probe into the Prince's Foundation has been dropped. That in the Metro. Back in a moment.
That's a deadlift, and that is 55 kilo.
Which sounds like an awful lot for your age. Is that not a lot? That's a walk in the park for you, is it?
Yeah.
So how much can you actually lift?
So my heaviest deadlift is 127.5 kilos.
Wow. And you have actually competed in various competitions, haven't you? We've called you the world's strongest 10-year-old, and there's a reason for that, isn't there? You've competed against others of your age. So what did you achieve? Tell us about it.
So I back squatted 100 kilo. I bench pressed 57.5 kilo, and I deadlifted 127.5 kilo, and the total was 285 kilo.
Wow. And was this at the USA powerlifting?
Yeah, we went over to
we
went to the Youth Nationals in America in Phoenix, Arizona, because in the UK Rowan can't compete in powerlifting until he's 12 years old. So we had to go to the States to set records officially. And Rowan, the previous total was 230 kilos, and Rowan broke that by 50 kilo, which is huge for his body weight and his age. So yeah, we're really proud of what he achieved over there.
It's quite extraordinary. We've actually got another little clip of you in action, so let's just see that, shall we?
My background is I train people. I've got a client with a brain injury, and I use the barbell as part of their rehab. So Rowan, since he was born, grew up in that environment, seeing us doing rehab and training with people with more complex needs. So since he could walk, Rowan's been driven. He's been hanging off things, running, jumping, pushing, pulling. He's just always been driven. And over the last few years, particularly, we've seen that he's progressed to see like he can express himself in performance. And when he was 8 years old, he was lifting loads which 10-year-olds were lifting, and so we realised that there was a potential for him to compete, and so that's why we pushed it the last year or so. But yeah, it's been fantastic, and Rowan's probably got another year or so of powerlifting before he wants to move towards playing rugby more to get to an academy when he's older.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the Whitehall editor of the Financial Times, Lucy Fisher. So, Lucy, let's go to your paper, shall we, the FT, which talks about average payouts for senior bosses hitting 16%. Tell us about this.
Well, this is the news that the average FTSE 100 chief earned £3.9 million last year, a 16% pay rise at a time when ordinary workers suffered a real-term pay cut because, of course, inflation outpaced wages growth. This has also seen the gap widen between chiefs and the median average earning of FTSE chiefs and the median average earning of ordinary workers has grown to 118 times. That's just how much more the bosses are earning. So unsurprising to see union chiefs like the GMB's Secretary General Gary Smith complaining about CEO fat cats on the front of the FT tomorrow.
Yes, fascinating. When workers, the paper points out, on average suffered a real terms pay cut with inflation outstripping wage rises. Quick look at the Metro, which we teased. No further police action will be taken over cash for honours allegations involving a charity set up by King Charles as Prince of Wales. The Met said the decisions to stop the probe into the Prince's Foundation followed advice from prosecutors and analysis of information received. But just below that as well, Pippa, another story in the Metro, that hundreds of students in some of the most deprived communities are to get the chance to attend sixth forms backed by Eton College, extending its ties to what they're calling educational cold spots.
Yeah, these are parts of the country that the government has identified as being generally quite deprived areas that are not, where pupils are suffering and not getting the level, quality of secondary education that they think that they should be, or that the government thinks that they should be. And it's expanding its free schools network. I think there's about 17 new free schools underway. And of these, 3 of them are going to be run in tandem with Eton College, obviously the top public school that's produced numerous British prime ministers. They're going to put in £1 million into these free schools in addition to what the state funds. They're going to share advice with teachers, and there's going to be opportunities for pupils at those free schools in places like Oldham to attend summer schools at Eton College in Windsor to see how the other half live. But they won't have to wear the uniform, and they will be co-ed schools.
OK, interesting. Sorry to cut you off again. Pippa, Lucy, thank you both. See you for the 11.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, northwestern parts can expect spells of wind and rain over the next few days, while the southeast looks mainly dry and sunny. Ireland and the northwestern half of the UK will see widespread showery outbreaks at first tomorrow. Southeastern half of Britain fine, apart from a few fog patches. The morning will bring sunny spells and widespread showers, well scattered in the south, southern England, East Anglia mainly dry. Plenty of sunshine there once the fog lifts. Temperatures much like today's. Quite a cool breeze for most of us, though.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.